Okay, so now we're going to deploy the application into Azure. We've reverted the change we made to this connection string locally in our code. We had made that change just simply to push those migrations up to the database to get the database in line of what the application will expect as far as the tables that need to be there. So we've reverted that and saved it. And so this is the code we're going to push up now. Lots of ways to deploy code to Azure, lots of better ways than what I'm about to do, but for speed and simplicity, I'm just going to use tried and true right click and publish. So I'm going to go right click publish here. It's going to select the target. I want to select Azure and app services on Windows. And it's going to have me select what account I want to use and then what subscription. And in here, it'll show me the resource groups that are associated with this. Now, I could create a new app service if I wanted to, but we've created this in advance. And so we're just deploying to the East region for now. So I'm going to do that and click Finish. And it's going to go in here and fill out all the necessary information. From here, I'm just going to click Publish. Okay, down here in the build output, we'll see what's happening. And we'll give it about 10 to 20 seconds and it should push our code up. Okay, so it's done. The code's been published. You see it automatically opens the window here. This isn't the local website anymore. This is Stephen Helwig Talks Tech. So it's pushed our code to the website. If we go back over and let's go back into our database and go into the query editor like we did before. Log back in. And we'll see if we run that select statement again, that we still have no values in this table, right? 0 results. So we're going to go in here and we're going to add a record. And we're going to say mow lawn. How about that? It needs to be done tomorrow or 2 days from now. We'll click create. Now, if we go back into the database and run that query, see, we now have a record. Mow lawn, it's been in the database, it has an ID. If we go and delete it, run that query again, we'll see 0 rows affected. There's nothing in results. So we'll leave one record in there just so we know. We'll say mow lawn and we'll put east just so we know that it's this record was created here. And that's it. So that's a real easy way for us to deploy our application, for us to see that the application is there in the East and it's connected to the database. We also put that app setting in there. So if we go in here and go to that health page, notice that it's pulling that message from the app settings, that status from the app setting, and we are in East US, okay? So a real simple way for us to deploy our application, get it running. We now have it deployed in one region, and so the next thing we're gonna do is deploy it to the secondary region. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take our code and deploy it out to our app service in the West region. Before we do that, however, there's a couple things we want to do. Right now, we haven't set up failover groups. We haven't geo-replicated our database. So for this initial deployment, we're going to have the app, the web app, actually talking to the database in East US. So we need to let it know the connection string for that database, and we haven't updated the configuration here. So we're going to go into this app service, go into the configuration, and we're going to give it 2 configuration settings. We've already given it the Azure region one, so now we're going to add the connection string. So we'll click new, and we'll do the same thing here, my DB connection. And then for the value, we'll paste that value in there. Click OK. And we'll hit save. Great. Now when we deploy our app into this web app, it'll be able to connect to the database. So it's going to connect from the West region to the database that's sitting in East US. When we go back to our application, I want to do one thing, which is uncomment some of this code that I had commented out. And this is just so that we can see, what database it's connecting to. And we're going to uncomment this as well. Save that. And then we're going to go through the same process as we did before, which is to publish this out. This is the publish profile for the East region. We're going to create a new publish profile. And we're going to select our app service in the West, in West US 2. Click Finish. And once it's ready, we'll click Publish. Once again, this will take approximately 20 seconds or so to publish out. So we'll give it a little bit of time here, and it should open up the browser for us directly in that website. So it's loading here. And what we should see is the same mow lawn east, right? So that was the task we added. Now we can create a new task. Mow lawn west, right? We'll put it out there. And if we were to go back to our database and look in that query editor again and run our select statement, we should see both records show up here. So there they are. Now, if we go to the app and we navigate to the health page here, we'll see that we're connected to the region that's in West US 2. We should be able to see that up here as well. And this will become much more important once we have Traffic Manager in place, and that we are connecting to the database in the East region. We have two separate applications running here, one in West US 2, one in East US. They're both connecting to the same database, but they're two disparate applications, right? You'd have to go to the URL for the West database or for the West application. You'd have to go to the URL for the East application to navigate to it. Now we want to start stitching it together. So next we're going to put Traffic Manager in place in front of these web applications to direct that traffic. Okay, we're back in the Azure portal and we're going to deploy our Traffic Manager profile. Prior to doing that, we need to actually make a change to something we did earlier. Earlier, we set our web apps to be basic tier. Now, basic tier actually doesn't support Traffic Manager. It's one of the features that you get once you move into the standard tier, and standard and higher premium are really for production-like workloads. So we're going to make a change and go to an S1 as opposed to a B1. And you'll notice if you look down here, it supports Traffic Manager. So we'll apply that change here in East, and then we're going to switch over real quick and apply it to the West. So we've done that here in East. Scroll down into Scale Up, and we'll select Production S1 and hit Apply. Okay, now that we're done there, we're going to go and create our Traffic Manager profile, and we'll come in here and search Traffic Manager Profile. Click Create. We'll call this SH, say TM Talks Tech. Okay. And we're going to go with the priority method. Now, I mentioned before there are quite a few different types of routing method here. You can have performance-based routing, geographic, weighted. We're using priority, kind of active passive. Priority is we're going to route all traffic to number 1, and then we're going to route traffic to number 2 if number 1 is not there. We're going to use the same resource group we've been using and click Create. And this will take probably about 30 seconds and should be created. It's fairly quick to create Traffic Manager. There it is. And we'll pin this to our dashboard. Move this over here. Traffic Manager is not a regional service, it's a global service. So it's not either in East US or West US, right? So it gives us that fault tolerance. Going into Traffic Manager, the first thing we're going to do is come to this configuration area. I'm just going to walk through a couple settings quickly in here. We have our routing method, our time to live. Under protocol, you can do HTTP, HTTPS, or TCP. Highly recommend, obviously, HTTPS. Not going to mess around with it today. We're just going to go on port 80 HTTP. And for the path, this is what the endpoint is monitoring. So this is where it's going to go to check whether or not your web app is up or down. A lot of times you'll have something on health to do that health check. I actually have a page there, but it just needs to access our page. If you can get to the home page, in this case, it's good. So we're not having any advanced health checks in this case. And then, you can tell it exactly what expected status code ranges for it to show that it's healthy. And then for endpoint failover settings, this is telling the system what settings to leverage for failover. So it's going to probe every 30 seconds, and you can You can choose between 10 or 30. Then it's going to say how many failures will it tolerate. So how many times does it have to get back a failure before it will fail over? The default is 3. I'm actually going to set this to 2 just for speed. And then the probe timeout means how long does it need to wait before it decides that it's not getting a response, right? So every 30 seconds it's going to check. After 2 failures, it's going to fail over, and it's for each request it's going to wait 10 seconds before it fails over. Okay, so once we have made all those changes, we can hit save. So now that's saved, we're going to actually configure our endpoints. So we click on endpoints here, click add. It's an Azure endpoint. We'll call it SH Talks Tech East. We're going to choose our resource type, which is app service, and we're going to choose this one. Priority 1, East is the primary, and we're going to save that profile. You'll see here it's checking the endpoint. That means it's doing the probes to get the initial value of whether or not it's healthy. And we're going to add a second endpoint while that's doing that. We're going to call this SH Talks Tech West 2. And we'll choose app services and West 2. Priority is 2. Okay, and we'll add that as well. So both of these are in checking status. They should return a value here shortly. We're going to go back to overview and actually grab the URL for our traffic manager endpoint and put that in the browser here. Give it a second to resolve. And we'll see that it's routing to East US, which is what we wanted. That's priority 1. So it's routing to East US. If we go to the health page, notice we're at the traffic manager endpoint, but if we go to the health page, it should show us here that the current web app region is East US. Very good. So now what we're going to do is enable the failover group on the database. Now we have routing on the web app. Now we want to enable that on the database side. Back in the Azure portal, we're going to navigate over now to the SQL Server we deployed in the East region. Once we get in here, we're going to go to failover groups, and you'll see that we have no failover groups created. So we're going to say add group, and we're going to name this FG Talks Tech in this instance. And we need a secondary server. We haven't created a secondary server yet. Our primary is going to be in the East. This is the server we're on right now. So we need a secondary server that it's going to communicate with in case of failover. So we need to create one in West 2. So we'll click this, click create new server, and we'll say SQL Server Talks Tech West 2. Now to validate, and we're going to use our user again. And grab the password here. And we will select West 2 as a region. And we want this allow Azure services flag turned on, right? We're just choosing the simplest networking options for right now. Now we can choose our failover policy. I'm going to choose automatic failover. You can choose manual. And even if it's in an automatic failover configuration, you can still force a manual failover. And then these are the grace periods to make sure that all read and writes are committed to the database before it fails over. The shortest grace period you can have is 1 hour. And then now we want to select which databases do we want to add to that group. Which databases are we going to enable? Not only we're going to enable the failover on, right? So we'll come in here. We only have one, so we'll check core DB, and we'll click create. And so that'll go off. Once again, initialize the deployment. It's going to create a server in the West. Once it creates that server, it's going to add core DB to that server, and it's going to start that geo-replication activity of replicating the data between the two servers. So we'll wait a minute or so and check in. Before we update our connection strings, I wanted to just push out some of the code that I had made. I had made those edits to allow us to see which database we were connected to, and I'd pushed it to West only. I've now pushed it to East, so the code in both regions are exactly the same. If we go back into the browser here and we go to that traffic manager health endpoint, you'll notice that we are connected to the database that's in East. So what we want that to say is actually the endpoint of our failover group listener. So in order to do that, we need to update our web apps to make sure that our web apps are talking to the failover group listener. So that way they're not connecting or communicating with the database directly, but rather letting the failover group listener route that request to the primary endpoint that's up and active. Going back into the Azure portal, we'll go over to the server. You can go to either server and click on failover groups. And if we click on the failover group, down at the bottom here, we'll have a read-write listener endpoint. So I'm going to copy that. You can't see it in my screen, but if you copy it, it should look like something like, actually, it doesn't look like that. It looks like this, right? And so you're just going to take that portion and overwrite where in your old connection string, it had your other endpoint. So from here to here, right? And so we're going to grab this one. Now mine doesn't have the password, so you'll need to add the password in there as well. So we're going to grab this and we're going to update the connection string in the web app. Okay, so we're going to go back in our dashboard to East US first, down to configuration. We'll go into edit here and we will override that and hit save. And then we will go into West US and do something similar. Okay. Copy, we'll overwrite the whole thing. Hit save. Okay, now that we've updated that, let's go back to our traffic manager endpoint. We're going to hit that again. And you'll notice now that we're talking to the failover group listener. So we're no longer talking directly to the database. That means if our failover group listener fails over the database between the primary and secondary, our transactions will still route to the primary, not just to East US. All right, when we come back, we're going to now do a test failover. So first we're going to try to fail over the web app, and then we'll fail over the backend.